Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm actually going to be taking a look at the rest of the Midnight Sun characters for this update, so that includes Man-Thing, Dr. Voodoo, and Sister Grimm. The video probably won't be as in-depth as some of the other videos that just feature a single character, but it should give you a good idea of how they perform relative to one another and which characters you might want to prioritize building depending on the content that they excel in. Just as a heads up, all the testing that I did with the characters is without a damage proc, and their builds are pretty bare bones. They don't even have any CTPs, they just have invincible obelisks, only attack Urus, and no artifact, so it's a pretty simple build. Man-Thing actually did surprisingly well in PvE with no damage proc, no uniform, and for a free character, he was able to take down stage 9 of Null pretty quickly and did so pretty much within 2 minutes. If you want to consider building this character for PvE, you can definitely use something like an Energy or Destruction since he is proc friendly. You could even go with a Rage if you really wanted to, but there are better options for PvE combat characters, and the character's kit actually lends pretty well to PvP performance, as you'll see later on in the video. On my account, the character can complete stage 24 without a leadership or support. However, he does seem to fall off a little bit since the ignore dodge is pretty much only in his awakened skill. He doesn't have it really in his base kit. So once you go to the higher stages, you might have some trouble connecting hits. And that's why I finished the first phase pretty much exactly within that 2-minute window. So he probably would have completed this without many seconds left at the end of the fight. Compared to Man-Thing, Dr. Voodoo is technically better than him, but you also have to consider that this is the character with a uniform, whereas Man-Thing doesn't have a uniform. So if you look at it that way, then Man-Thing does end up actually being better than Dr. Voodoo overall. But in the current situation, without Man-Thing having a uniform, Dr. Voodoo is slightly ahead of him, at least in PvE. In some ways, the character is pretty proc friendly depending on the rotation that you do, but if you really want to maximize his damage, I think that a Rage or a CTP of Judgment would probably be the most ideal, since you can really squeeze in some of his other skills that have slight delays on them, like the first skill and the second skill. Similar to Man-Thing, without using a leadership, supports, or damage proc, the character is capable of completing stage 24 since he finishes the first phase within about 2 minutes and ends up completing about 10 seconds faster than Man-Thing, both on stage 24 and on stage 9. Compared to the other two characters, it seems like Sister Grimm is the better of the options for PvE, although she did end up completing stage 9 just a few seconds slower than Dr. Voodoo. When I went to the higher stages, she did end up performing better, as well as in Giant Boss Raid. If you want to build her specifically for PvE, I would probably recommend a Rage or a Judgment, since her skills aren't necessarily too proc friendly, and she does end up dealing element damage and has some delay cancels in her rotation. Just keep in mind that she is a blast female character that can only reach level 70 currently. She can't reach level 80, so for that reason you're going to have better options in this category and might want to consider building her for PvP, since she actually does perform pretty decently at the mid-level there. Also, you can see why I said that the character has a little bit more PvE potential, because I was able to do stage 29 without a damage proc, leadership, or support, and was able to complete it a bit faster than the other characters, even though the stage was 5 levels higher. You can get an even better idea of the PvE comparisons when I took them into Giant Boss Raid. Sister Grimm was able to complete the first phase the fastest of the two, and did so within about 1 minute and 30 seconds. The rotation that I use for the character is to do a 5 and delay cancel after about a half second to a second, or more importantly when you see the camera just shift slightly. Then you do a 4 cancel into a 3. When you have your ultimate skill, you just open with that first and cancel it immediately into those rotation, and as always you can weave in the first and second skill to fill up the ultimate faster. Surprisingly, Man-Thing was the second fastest clear of these characters, despite the fact that Dr. Voodoo did end up performing better in World Boss Legend. I'm not exactly sure why this is, but I'm guessing it's something to do with the CC effects and buffs in Dr. Voodoo's kit not interacting properly in Giant Boss Raid, but I could be wrong. It could just be due to maybe rotations or the way that I tested, but either way you can see that both of these characters are pretty close to one another regardless. The rotation for Man-Thing is really simple. You just do 5, cancel 4, cancel 3, and then when you have your Awaken skill, you just use that in the beginning and cancel it into this rotation. Again, you can always do the first and second skill when you're waiting for the other skills to come off cooldown. As you can see from this clip, Dr. Voodoo did end up clearing the first phase the slowest, taking a little bit over 2 minutes. And besides the factors that I mentioned previously, it could also be that he is a universal type and doesn't get as big of a damage increase for the type advantage that the other characters get on their particular days. The skill rotation for Dr. Voodoo is probably the trickiest of the three. You do a 5, cancel 4, cancel 1, and then you delay cancel that after the animations appear, which is usually when the camera kind of goes up a little bit, and then you go into the third skill. When you have your Awaken skill available, you simply use that in the beginning and immediately cancel it into the rotation that I just mentioned. In terms of the PvP rankings, Man-Thing is by far the best of them. He's really durable even if you don't have his artifact, which I didn't have in his testing, but greatly increases his survivability. He also does a really good amount of damage for not having a uniform. Besides that, he has a great variety of skills for PvP, including penetration, invincibility, barrier, super armor, damage reduction, passive healing. He has a little bit of iframe, and he also has that new CC effect, which is panic, that really helps him there too. Another thing is that many of the character's skills have a wide area of effect and lingering damage on it, so even if you potentially end up dying mid-cast, you could end up taking out the opponent from the damage that continues afterwards. If you're considering building the character for PvP, I would probably recommend a CTP of regen first. It's why I ended up using, because the character works pretty well with it. He has high base health, he has passive healing, he has invincible in his 4th skill, which the AI usually prioritizes, and he also has super armor in his kit, which means that you kind of get super guard break immunity and is usually the main thing that the reforged regens lack, so you're kind of covered there. Alternatively, if you wanted to go a little bit more on the offense side while still trying to be tanky, you could also go with the CTP of Conquest. It should work pretty well for the character considering that he often goes into invincible and has continuous healing. Besides Man-Thing, Sister Grimm is the second most ideal character for PvP in the group. She doesn't have as many tools as Man-Thing does, but she does perform pretty well considering how the AI and the skills interact. She usually just stays in between either the 5th or the 4th skill, and both of those skills are full iframes. So if the opponent doesn't have an iframe ignore or any kind of high priority to attack before she goes into those skills, then they're pretty much just done for. And on top of that, those 2 skills pretty much are the hardest hitting skills in her kit and have all the best effects in them. The 4th skill, for example, has the invincible and healing, and the 5th skill gives her a bunch of attack increase. Similar to Man-Thing, both of these skills have a wide area of effect and lingering damage, so even if she gets interrupted or killed, the skill could potentially still end up dealing enough damage to take out the opponent. In terms of the build to use for the character, I think that you have a bunch of options and it depends on how you want to build her. You could use a CTP of Destruction if you want to try at a higher chance of taking out metas by getting that proc off early in the penetration. However, if you want to make her more annoying in the mid-level, I think a CTP of Authority could work pretty well, since she does have a good amount of damage reduction in her kit already, so the steal effect could make it even more annoying with the constant invincible that she activates and that procs from that CTP. And considering that the character also provides a debuff cleanse passively, you could also utilize her with a CTP of Insight. She'll still hide in those iframes and deal a good amount of damage despite not having guard break immunity, and it also really boosts up the other 2 characters that you would use with her. I don't really have anything good to say about Dr. Voodoo in PvP, outside of the leadership that gives that debuff reduction and the attack increase, and that you could probably pair up with Sister Grimm. Doesn't have much going for him in his kit outside of the fact that his skills also linger similar to Man-Thing and Sister Grimm and can potentially take out an opponent even after he dies. In terms of the build options for him, it probably doesn't really matter. You could maybe use a CTP of Insight on him instead of Sister Grimm and just make Sister Grimm stronger, but otherwise, if you don't really care, you can just throw an Invincible Obelisk on him or maybe even an Authority. If you do end up using these characters for PvP, I would highly recommend pairing them together. You can use Sister Grimm for other magic characters to buff them up, such as Adam Warlock and things like that, but she's probably going to die pretty quickly anyway, and this does end up making a pretty good mid-level team that can potentially high roll and take out some strong, maybe meta characters. If you pay close attention to these clips, you'll notice that Dr. Voodoo usually ends up dying first, even though he has an invincible obelisk, which is one of the reasons why I recommended a CTP of Insight for him, since he's probably going to die anyway, even if you use like an invincible obelisk or an authority. Even though Man-Thing is really tanky and does really great damage, he does end up usually dying second because he doesn't have too many iframes to avoid taking damage. And because of that, Sister Grimm usually ends up dying last because she just constantly stays in those iframes. This is another reason why I was potentially thinking of a destruction for her, because she can get that penetration and end up bursting the opponents while she hides in those iframes. Besides that team, one of the other ones that you can use Sister Grimm on is with Doctor Strange and Nick Fury. Nick Fury will give super armor to both of them, while Doctor Strange provides the CC and damage, and Sister Grimm provides the debuff, cleanse, and survivability. Keep in mind that this is with the assumption that you have something like a rage on Doctor Strange, so you benefit from the guard break immunity and super armor, or kind of super guard break immunity that Nick Fury provides. Outside of those characters, you could definitely pair Sister Grimm with other teams in Alliance Conquest, like Wong leadership, to provide that kind of immunity to all damage, and just use another strong character in the third spot. Though I wouldn't necessarily recommend pairing her with Adam Warlock, since you can pretty much use anyone with Adam Warlock, and oftentimes you want to use kind of stronger characters for him to be tougher to take down by the opponents. One thing to look out for is if or when Dormammu gets a uniform or T4. Since he doesn't have a debuff leadership, you could potentially use his own great leadership and pair him with Sister Grimm to give him that debuff cleanse, considering that he is a magic tagged character. So as you can see from the testing, if you're into PvP like Alliance Conquest, then Man-Thing and Sister Grimm are solid pickups there. Dr. Voodoo not as much, but again, if you wanted to throw something like a CTP of Insight on him, you could just end up buffing up these characters, but I think for the most part, he's mostly just for the leadership in something like PvE, specifically Dispatch, since he has that great debuff increased leadership like White Fox and Enchantress has. And on top of that, he also provides an attack increase and is also a universal type, so he'll work in pretty much any dispatch level. Also, I forgot to mention it at the start of the video, but if you made it this far, I am also doing a crystal coupon giveaway, so make sure to leave your Discord name in the comments section down below of this video, so I know who to give the coupon to if you do end up winning. That pretty much does it for this one. If you found the video entertaining or helpful, please consider subscribing, liking, and maybe even sharing this video with others, since it helps them out and it also helps my channel grow. As always, I appreciate people taking the time to watch these, so thank you, but the video is now over.